¿Qué tal, chicos? ¿Cómo están? Nuevamente para seguir con las sesiones de la JCOM 2020, tengo el gusto de presentar nuevamente a nuestro amigo Reza Rahman. Reza, hi.
Hi there.
Perfect, Reza. We listen to you.
All right, perfect. Let's get started. I think hopefully you can see my screen already. So this is a talk about the many different ways that you can deploy Jakarta E applications onto the Azure cloud. It's specific to Jakarta E and specific to Azure, but honestly, a lot of what I'll be talking about generically applies to any Java application, and in fact, maybe any application. And a majority of the mainstream clouds like Google and Amazon actually have similar type of functionality based on what I'm going to show you today. So what I'll be showing you, though, is not going to be any slides. So I don't have any slides for this talk whatsoever. What I do have instead is actually a GitHub link that you can download and use all of these, or what I'm going to show you yourself. So hopefully a little bit more valuable than just a slide deck. I'm going to copy over the link to that in the chat now, so you guys can take a look at it after the fact. But basically, this is when you take a look at this link, what you realize is this is actually a workshop. Generally, if you're a beginner and you're starting from scratch and you're going through the entire workshop and doing everything in the workshop, it's going to take you about 6 to 8 hours, right? So obviously, we don't have 6 to 8 hours here. We have about 40 minutes. So what I'm going to do is show you just enough about this application so that you can, after this talk, go and explore this GitHub account and this workshop by yourself. Okay. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So first thing is we're going to do is start everything just on our own laptop, just locally. In fact, even if you're doing cloud development, usually you'll be doing development in your own laptop, in your local machine. It doesn't actually make sense to do cloud deployments just for development. So that's what we're going to do. So I actually have everything set up already. So if you do the steps that I'm doing right now, you basically go into this Jakarta E folder, and this will give you several steps of what you need to do. So I've already set up everything just in the interest of time. So I've set up JDK8, I've set up Payara, which is the application server I'm using just for this demo. You don't have to use Payara. It's a Jakarta E8 application. You can use any Jakarta E8 runtime like Wildfly or OpenLiberty or Western Liberty or whatever you want. I'm also going to be using Eclipse very briefly. You don't have to use Eclipse. It's just a Maven-based application. I'll show you the Maven POM file in a second. Anything that can understand Maven, whether that's IntelliJ or NetBeans or VS Code for Java, you can use it very easily. I'll also be using Docker. I'll explain why I'm using Docker in a second, even for local development. But I'll be using Docker, and I'll also be using this code. I have this code downloaded onto my local machine already. So this is nothing much more than a CRUD-based application. It has a database in the backend. So you need a database up and running. The database I'm going to be using in this case is going to be Postgres. Could have used really anything that works with JPA, but I chose to use Postgres just because that's what I'm most familiar with. So there's a couple of different ways that I could be starting up Postgres. I could actually be installing it as a daemon on my own machine, but it doesn't really make very much sense because on a day-to-day basis, I do not use Postgres. So a much more easy way of doing this sort of thing is actually just installing things through Docker, because when the Docker image shuts down, basically everything is gone, right? You don't, that Postgres instance is no longer up and running on your own machine. Whereas I do tend to use Docker quite frequently. Now, you don't have to do it this way. You could have just installed Postgres, but in fact, we'll be using Docker later on in the demo, so it just makes sense to use Docker for now. So if you haven't used Docker before, I'll explain this command. So this is a command that's going to start the database for us. At the very left-hand side, you see it says Postgres. So what this is doing is it's going to go out onto GitHub Docker Hub and download Postgres and run Postgres. So that's the Postgres image name. There's various other commands parameters that I'm also specifying here. I'm giving the image a name just in case something goes wrong. I need to refer to this image by name, maybe to bring it to the foreground or take it to the background or explicitly shut it down. There's also a -v argument. So what this is doing is that it's taking a file system path that's on my local machine and mounting it onto the Docker image itself. The reason for this is that when the Docker image shuts down, it takes down everything else with it. So since we're running a database here, we don't want that. We want the file system to be outside, residing outside. And this is how you do it. You're basically like a Unix file system mount. Finally, you need to understand this -p command. Networking is probably one of the complex things you'll be dealing with when you deal with Docker and Kubernetes. It's a little bit harder to understand. So you need to understand what exactly is going on. When I start a Docker image, it's literally starting a machine within my machine. And that machine has actually its own IP address, and it is in its own network, own virtual network. And I cannot access that virtual network by default. I have to open up a port. So that's what that -p command is doing. And I'm literally opening up a port so that I can access that running Postgres instance. Otherwise, even if you got an image up and running, you won't be able to do anything with it at all. So let's go ahead and get started with the database. So the database is up and running. I already had ran this once in the morning, so this went super fast. So the database is up and running now. This is my application. I've already set it up in Eclipse. I've already done the JDBC driver installation. All of those instructions, again, are here so that you can do everything by yourself. But this is just a plain old Java EE application. I won't go through it in great detail. I'll just show you that there's just one dependency, and that dependency is on Jakarta E8, as you can see on screen now. So a really simple application. It uses CDI, JAX-RS, JSF, JPA, HAB, so all of the most commonly used Java EE APIs. Feel free to take a look at that. We're not going to do that. I'm just going to do a build of this application. So Maven install. And this is just a plain old-fashioned WAR file that I just generated. So if you take a look at this, and in the end, there was a WAR file that was generated on my machine. So now I'm ready to deploy this WAR file. So the way I do that in Eclipse is just right-click and run on server, and this is going to deploy the application to Payara for me. Okay, and this is the application. I don't really like the built-in browser for Eclipse. I don't use it that often, so I'm going to just take this into onto Chrome. Okay, so there's the application. Let me add one more record here. So as you can see, it added a record. Let me delete one. So I'll delete the 3. That's it. Right? It's a very simple CRUD application, nothing too fancy about it. I'm basically done showing you the application running on a local machine. This is nothing hopefully new to you at all. So I'll just Control-C this, and we're done with the database. In fact, I can be done with Eclipse as well. I don't need Eclipse IDE for the rest of this demo, so I'm just going to shut it down. Now, once we have this up and running, let's think about how to take this application and begin to run it on the cloud. So there's many different ways that you can run this application onto the cloud. There is virtual machines, or IaaS. So this is just really yet another virtual machine, just like the machine I'm interacting with, my own machine here. It's another machine like that, except the machine is not in your own data center. It's not running locally. It's running on Azure. So it's one of the simplest ways of beginning to get on the cloud. A lot of people that just get started with the cloud, this is the path they take. I'll show you this path. It'll look very, very familiar. It's really not very different from a lot of the things that you do on your local machine or on your own local data center today. So the opposite end of IaaS is PaaS, or platform as a service. And in this case, what happens is the platform does everything for you. Right? So you just point and click a few things. Let's say you want to use JBoss or Tomcat. Basically, after you go through those steps, or CLI configuration in the cloud provider, you basically have JBoss EAP or Tomcat or whatever your platform is up and running for you. And all you need to do then is just deploy your WAR file, deploy your EAR file, deploy your jar file, and basically you're done. So it's the highest level of abstraction possible. Something in between those things, and actually one that is very, very wildly popular these days, that is Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is actually an abstraction between IaaS. IaaS is very, very low level. PaaS, which is extremely high level, as high level as you can get. And Kubernetes actually provides some level of abstraction from your data center. So think, when you look at the Kubernetes files, you'll see you're kind of like describing your infrastructure in configuration, and basically creating your data center on the fly, but it's not as high level as just creating just a service or whatever it is that you want. In between that, there is another option that allows you to just use Docker. So you won't use Kubernetes here. You can just do some simple containerization using Docker. And the way you do that in Azure is called Azure Container Instances. I won't show you that example. It's going to be a bit too much. So today, because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to show you the IaaS way, which is a simple, basic, simple way. of deploying to the cloud, and I'm going to show you Kubernetes real quick, and I'll let you explore the rest of it, hopefully by yourself. So let's go ahead and into the IaaS directory. Here we have the IaaS setup. There's a little bit of setup here. I will need a database in this case as well. I'm still using Postgres. The database in this case is going to be on the cloud. I've actually created the instructions of how to do that is in front of you right now, but I've actually gone ahead and created the database already. So I'm just going to sign in onto the Azure portal. Azure portal is one of the easiest ways of getting started with Azure. So it's a way of deploying resources just by point and click. So this is what I have done. So this is the database that I created this morning just behind the scenes. So it's Jakarta Cafe DB. It's an Azure database for Postgres Server. And as you can see, I did a little bit of testing here. So there's a little bit of activity on this database right at this moment. But basically, I have the database up and running. Okay. The next thing we need to do is actually create the virtual machine. So create the machine where we're going to deploy Pyra and deploy our application. So let's go ahead and do that next. So we'll do that through the portal. So we'll go to Home and create a resource. I need to create an Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a operating system I'm choosing to use in this case. You can use any Unix-based operating system. I think it'll work just fine. So I'll pick the latest Ubuntu server that's available on Azure. I'll hit Create. So I need to create this in some kind of resource group. So resource group, I've already created one already. It's called Jakarta Cafe Group Reza. So it's included there. I need to give the virtual machine a name. The name I'm going to give it is Jakarta Cafe Server and suffixed by my name. Jakarta Cafe Server Reza is the name I'm going to give it. The region can be East US. It's perfectly fine. That's what we want it to be. This is fine. Gen 1, Ubuntu Server 20. The machine I'm going to be using looks like it's about $30 a month. That's reasonable. And then finally, when we create this machine, we're going to need to access it to do something useful with it. So typically, you would do that via SSH. In a production environment, you would use an SSH key. In this case, just because we're doing a demo, I'm just going to use simple passwords. So I'll pick the password option. The username I'm going to give it is simply Pyra. And I'm going to give it a password, my super secret password. I'm just going to copy and paste from here. If you do use it, please use another password. Don't use this one. Or just delete it real quick, just like I do. So I need to open this. I need to access this machine from the internet. So I'm going to open up port 80, open up port HTTPS, and open up port 22, just so I can access it via SSH. So all those three ports are going to be open. I'm going to hit next here. That's all fine. Going to networking. Yes, it's creating a virtual network. Opening up AT, HTTPS, and SSH. Yes, those are the three I want. I don't need RDP. So I think we're good to go here. Yeah, this is all fine. Don't need advanced. Don't need any tags. I'm going to hit review and create. And we're going to go ahead and create this machine. Now, for those of you who remember in the old days, what it took in order to get a machine up and running, it took days, right, to do that. So on the web, it doesn't take days, but it still takes a decent amount of time, right? So it's just not immediately created like just in a few minutes. You still need to deploy the virtual machine. You still need to do the operating system installation. You need to configure the network. So there's some time involved. So it's not going to happen right away. So we're going to wait for this to happen, and this is why I was doing a lot of things behind the scenes for you guys, just to save enough time so that we can do the demo in a short time span. So as this is going on, it won't take too long. As this is going on, I'm going to show you what is next. So next, I'm going to log on onto this server that I just created. It's going to have a public IP. I'll show you how to get the public IP in a second and be able to log on onto this machine and be able to do stuff to it. Now, I'm going to do this in a very old-fashioned way. I'm going to literally do exactly what I would have done on a local machine on a fresh installation of Ubuntu. I'm going to install JDK8. In this case, I'm choosing to use Zulu. So I'm going to need to add the keys, need to add the Zulu repository, need to do an apt update to update my repository. I mean, because of all the font size a little bit. I'm going to install Zulu. Right, so actually my deployment is now complete, so I can actually do it. So let's go to the deployment. Here is a public IP. So I'm copying it right from here. I'm going to hit copy here, and we'll go over to the console and say SSH Payara at this public IP that I have. Okay, yes. Yes. Okay, and hopefully I remember the password correctly. Okay, and there we have it. I'm now on my own machine. If I do an ls here or pwd here, this is essentially my Payara installation. Now I'm accessing basically a machine that was created on the cloud for me, and I'm ready to do whatever it is that I need to do to this machine. So let's go ahead and begin our installation process of the application. So I'm going to install the keys for Zulu. Okay, I'm going to install Zulu as a repository. Okay, next step is to do a sudo update. All right, that is done. We're going to update the repository, update the installation of the operating system. We're going to install Zulu. So this is going to make sure that I have a JDK 8 installation on this machine. I said that I was doing this in the old-fashioned way. What you can do is all of the steps that I'm doing now, you can put them into a script. It's called an ARM template in Azure. So this is a JSON file that basically will have all of these instructions built into it. And I just need to execute that one ARM template. And whatever it is that I'm doing now is going to be automated for me. And even beyond that, there's another capability in Azure called solution templates. I'll talk about solution templates in a second as soon as this is done. Hopefully we're on a Saturday here. The network is going to be pretty fast, and we're going to do an installation pretty quickly here. So this is still Zulu being installed. So a little bit slower. Hopefully, we'll be able to finish the demo in time. So above and beyond ARM templates, which again is a mechanism to script out the installation of these virtual machines, you also have solution templates, and that is an even higher level of abstraction. And we have solution templates for all of the major parts of Java EE, certainly. So things like WebSphere and WebLogic. And let's move ahead, and I'll explain to you a bit more what solution templates are. Okay, so I'm going to install Maven next. Normally, you wouldn't do this. Normally, you would just do the Maven deployment in your CI/CD machine and deploy the WAR file here. I'm just keeping things simple here, so I'm going to just do a local build of Maven, just like I did on my laptop earlier. So I'm going to install Maven. Okay, so solution templates are actually even more advanced compared with ARM templates, and you just do a point and click on Azure, on the Azure portal, and basically everything will be taken care of by the vendor. So people like IBM and Oracle, they'll create their own solution templates for things like WebSphere and WebLogic and JBoss EAP. And once you point and click that, you'll have a running instance of JBoss EAP. It's almost like PaaS, except that after the solution template is done, you can log on onto the virtual machine and do whatever else you need to do to that virtual machine. So now we have Maven installed. We're going to go ahead and download Payara. In order to do that, you just need to download the Payara zip file. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so the Payara zip is installed. Next, I need to unzip this, and Ubuntu does not come with unzip because zip and unzip actually have a little bit of licensing issues. So you need to explicitly install unzip. So we'll do that now. Okay, so that is done. We're going to unzip Payara, and that is all you really need to do in order to get Payara up and running. Is just download, unzip, and you're done. Okay, so we have Payara installed as well. Next, we're going to get our application itself. So let's do that. So I'm downloading it from my GitHub account. If you would, maybe from your CI/CD machine. Okay, so the application is now downloaded. I'm going to unzip the application. So there's my application now, Jakarta Azure Master. That's my application. And next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Maven install and build the WAR file. So let's do that next. Okay, so as you can see, there's a POM file here. I'm going to just invoke the POM file. So I'm going to do Maven install, or let's do Maven package. And now I have my zip file, the WAR file built. I'm ready to deploy it. Homepage. That's we're going to do the rest of our work. Okay, there's a homepage back again. And the next step for me is actually to get Pyara up and running. So Pyara will run on port 80. So in order to run port 80 on a Unix machine, I need to be super user. So I'm just going to log on as super user to make things easy. So now I'm logged on into a super user. I'm still in the same directory as I was before. I'm going to now start Pyara. So this is the command to do that. It's start domain is going to start the Pyara server. All right, so the Pyara is up and running now, but it is running on port 8080. That's the default mechanism for Pyara. So if I don't want to do that, I need to ask Pyara to basically reset itself and run on port 80 instead. So this is the command that does it. It's a long command. You can take a look at it later, but at the very end, you see this 80 here. So let's copy this over. So now Pyara is running on port 80. And I can access it from the internet. I am using a Postgres driver. I need to add the Postgres driver. You do that by issuing the add library command in Pyara. So let's do that. Okay, so the library is now installed. I'm ready to access the application. Now the last thing that is left is just to deploy the application, and that's what we're going to do next. So that is using the deploy command, as you see here, and deploying the WAR file that I built a little bit earlier. So let's run that. Okay, the application is up and running. So now we can go ahead and access it. We can access it with the same public IP address that we had before. We'll just access it via port 80. As you can see, Pyara is up and running on Azure. This is always just, it amazes me, especially given how difficult this was to do a few years ago. And there's the application. I don't have any data yet. I can go ahead and add some data. There's some data that I added onto the machine. Basically, the application is up and running on the cloud using IaaS. So they're pretty simple stuff, and could be even simpler if you're using something like ARM templates, or even better, if you just want an application server up and running, or even fully cluster mode, multiple instances of application server. You can use the Azure solution templates to do that. So next, we're going to move into Kubernetes. That is what I'll have in enough time to show you guys. And we'll see how things look like in the Kubernetes world. So in this case, again, you need a database. We'll use the same database as before. So the database is already up and running. Next, we'll also need to create a Kubernetes cluster so that we can deploy on it. And again, just to save a little bit of time, I have done that beforehand. Right, so as you can see, if you go into for example, Jakarta Cafe cluster, this says it's an Azure Kubernetes service. It is already up and running. There's nothing on it right now. I'll show you that in a moment, that there's nothing on it right now. If you go to, for example, take a look at some of the insights. This is basically a quiet cluster at this point. There's nothing much going on. Everything is empty. There's nothing actually deployed onto this cluster just yet. So the way you interact with Kubernetes is something called kube control. And you need to connect up kube control to this running instance of the Kubernetes cluster running on Azure. The way you do that is this using this one command that I've already issued before this morning, but you can take a look at it. But once you issue this command, you're basically connected up from your local machine via kube control to this Kubernetes cluster. So let's see what is going on with the Kubernetes cluster. So we'll do kubectl get nodes, and there should be 3 nodes. I see. I need to exit out of my machine. I'm still on the machine that I had run before. So now I'm in my local environment, and we'll do the same thing. So we'll let me actually go in here for a second and go to where the code actually is. It's in GitHub, and it's Jakarta Azure. And I'm going to just go ahead and go into the Kubernetes directory. And from here, I'll do kube control get nodes. And there's 3 nodes, as you can see. So there's 3 machines ready to be deployed and ready to put pods on it. So let's see what kind of pods we have right now at this moment. No pods, right? So there's nothing actually deployed onto this machine, onto this cluster just yet. Let's do services. And you'll see there's only one service, and that has a cluster IP address, so you can access it internally, but not externally. And it is just the Kubernetes service itself, right? So the Kubernetes infrastructure that will do things like dynamic scaling and reliability, that is the only one that is running on this cluster right at this moment. So we're ready to create stuff. We're ready to deploy stuff onto this machine. And in order to do that, the first thing I need to do is the same old step as before. I need a WAR file to deploy. And so that's what we're going to do next. As you can see, there's a POM file there. I'm going to do an MVN package again. And there's my WAR file that was just created. Now we need to bump back up a second. And we're going to put this WAR file into a Docker image. Okay, and I'll explain what a Docker image is in a second and how it looks like. But let's go ahead and build the Docker image first, and then it'll make it easier to understand what it actually is. So we're going to go ahead and issue this command to build the Docker image, and I'll explain the syntax of this command in just a second. So Docker build, that's obvious. Build a Docker image. I'm giving it a name, and the name must match my Docker Hub ID, right? So in order for this Docker image to be accessible to Kubernetes, which remember Kubernetes is running on Azure, it needs to be put in some kind of public infrastructure. So in this case, I'm using Docker Hub to upload this Docker image. And the name of this, the first part of the name, Reza Rahman, needs to match my Docker Hub ID. I'll show you my Docker Hub account in a second. Let's go to docker.com, sign in. And as you can see, this is the name of my account. So I need to match this up with that name and give the image a name. So the name of the image is Jakarta Cafe, and the :v1 stands for attack. So I'm giving it a version, literally. So I'll give it a version and hit enter here. Okay, so image is built. So now I have a Docker image. I could run this Docker image even locally, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you what's in the Docker image. So this is the file that we executed. It's called a Docker file. It's in the current directory. And basically what this does is that it's a compact way of describing your infrastructure. So all of those things that we're doing in the virtual machine before, that is the same thing that is going on here. So when I say from Payara full, that includes the operating system, the Java installation, the Payara installation. All of that is done from that another base image that the Payara guys have created. So all I need to do in this case is just like I was doing in VM, I need to deploy the WAR file. I need to deploy the Postgres jar file. I need to add the library. And lo and behold, I'll have, whenever I run this Docker image, it's going to execute all of these steps, and I'm going to get a running machine, just like I was in the VM case, running machine that is running this application. Okay, so that's what this Docker image is all about. If there was a little bit of time, I would show you how to run the Docker image. But since we're a little bit short of time, I'm going to go ahead and push this Docker image onto my public repository. And the way you do that is by issuing the Docker push command. So let's do that next. Okay, pushing the Docker image, and because I did this earlier in the morning, this is also going to go pretty fast. So I'm going and uploading this into my Docker Hub repository. Let's refresh my Docker repository, and let's say hit refresh, and you'll see that Jakarta Cafe was updated just a few seconds ago, right? So I just uploaded my fresh image onto my Docker Hub account, and now I'm ready to reuse that Docker image on my Kubernetes cluster. So next step is I need to create the cluster. So I'm going to issue the command to create the cluster, and I'll show you what the command actually does. Okay, so it executed really quickly, but there's stuff going on behind the scenes, trust me. So, but I'll show you what's in this YAML file that I just executed. So the YAML file sits in the same directory, and it's called Jakarta Cafe, and it is literally taking the image that I created and deploying it. Right. So as you can see, here's the name of the image. I've actually, in my local machine, I've changed this to Reza Rahman, this Docker Hub ID, and it is referring to that image. And it is going to deploy this image as well. It gives it the same name as before, and the replicas equals 2, meaning that there's 2 copies, okay, of this image. So there's 2 copies of the application, 2 copies of Payara running on this cluster, and it is a type of deployment. So I'm deploying these 2 machines. Now, once you do that, it's the same deal as the other Docker images running it locally. So you cannot access it. It's within that Docker cluster itself. So in order to access it, you need to put a service in front of these pods. So the type of service that I'm creating is a type of load balancer. Okay, since I have 2 instances of Payara, I'm going to load balance across them. And I'm also going to do port mapping. So the Kubernetes cluster is available on port 80 publicly. It's not available on port 8080. But the machines, since I didn't do anything, is running on the Payara instances are running on port 8080. And basically, the load balancer is going to do the mapping from port 80 to port 8080 because of the mapping that I just created here. Okay, so it's basically up and running now. So let's see how the cluster has changed. So we'll do keep control get nodes. We still have 3 nodes. That hasn't not changed, but let's take a look at pods. And now we have 2 pods, right, corresponding to the 2 copies of Payara that I created. And you'll notice they're both in ready state and they're both running. So my deployment was successful. I have 2 running instances of the application up and running now. So let's do services. So as you can see, the Kubernetes service is still up and running, but there's another service that was created, and that is the load balancing service that I just created. And as you can see, in this case, the load balancer has a public IP address. We're going to go ahead and access this public IP address. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll copy that address and hit enter here, and we hit one of the copies. So the load balancer worked, and it sent us to one of the pods. And now let's try to access the application. And there's the application. It looks the same as before because we're talking about the same database, right? So because we're talking about the same database, we're looking at the same data. I could click this a little bit. Let's do that, in fact. So I'm going to hit delete on this one. Let's add another one. Okay, and another one. So did a little bit of activity. Now let's go back into the cluster itself and see how the cluster has changed or not. Right. So let's refresh this insights, and you'll notice there's some activity. Right, the CPU activity is going up, so that you get all of these nice statistics from the console telling you what is going on with your application. So the node CPU utilization has gone up because I did a little bit of those deleting. The memory utilization is going up a little bit. The node count should be going up in a second. So active pod count. So node count is going to be the same. It's going to be 3 because we haven't increased the node count, but the pod count will go over from 0 to 3. In fact, let's refresh it once again. And you'll see that's the end of the CPU activity. The memory will go down soon as well here. And we have an active pod count from 0 to 3. So that is basically getting things up and running on Kubernetes. It's not as scary as it sounds, right? So it is actually pretty simple stuff in the end. If there's enough time and there's no questions at all, I'll show you the Docker ACI way of the Azure Container instances of doing this as well. There's not enough time to show you a PaaS demo, but I think we can show you at least the Azure Container instances demo in a second here. So again, this is all available in the URL. You can all try this out and see for yourself the different ways of accessing basically Azure instances and the Azure cloud and creating applications in different ways. And these are all of the different resources that we just created. Okay, so let's jump back in a second and see if there's any questions. And if there's no questions at all, I'll just go ahead and show you the demo of Azure Container instances as well. Okay, so any questions?
Reza, one question.
Yeah.
Okay, Reza, are there future plans to have Payara with Fly, WebLogic on the Microsoft Azure Marketplace?
So those are already there. So in the Azure Marketplace, you today have WebLogic. We're working to get WebSphere on there as well. WebSphere used to be the case, so we're going to create a solution template for WebSphere as well. The WebLogic template is already there. Let me show you how to get to that. So if you go to Azure, so best way is just follow my Twitter handle. I usually tweet these things out. But if you go here, and you go to the Azure Marketplace, we just did an announcement of putting WebSphere up on there. So here's all the WebSphere offerings. So you can read through that, and it'll do all of the things that we showed before. It does this in a much more simpler way to create virtual machines. So we have similar capabilities for Wildfly and Red Hat JBoss AP right at this moment. We don't have WebSphere right now, but we're creating WebSphere there as well. The Payara guys are creating something like Payara Cloud that does also similar kind of capabilities, but it's more like a PaaS solution. So all of the Java EE application servers are actually, to some extent or the other, are on the Azure Marketplace already, and it's going to be improving even more going forward. Any other questions?
No, Reza.
Okay, so I have a little bit of time, about 5 minutes. So let me show you the Azure Container Instances capabilities. So we'll go to back to my instructions here, and I'll show you how to do this to use just Docker and not Kubernetes. Okay, so I'm going to come up here for a second and go into the Docker directory instead. And I do have an application there as well. I'm going to go ahead and run this application and build the application. So mvn install. Okay, so the bar file is done. Notice there is another Docker file here. The Docker file looks very, very simple, but we do need to rebuild it just in case. So I'm going to go ahead and rebuild the Docker image just once more. Okay, so it's built. We're going to push it. So we've gone ahead and pushed it. Now what we're going to do is use Azure Container Instances, and that is something in between Kubernetes and Docker, right? So we have the Docker image already ready to go. Let's say I don't want to use Kubernetes because I don't have such a complex deployment. I just have a few instances that I want to create. And that is a perfect case for just using Azure Container Instances with your Docker images. So let's go ahead and create that. So we'll go to back to the Azure portal, create a resource. In this case, we're going to go to containers again, and we're going to say container instances. That's the first choice here. Okay, so we're going to pick the same resource group as before. I'm going to give it a container name. So I'm going to give it Jakarta Cafe container. I want it created in ECS. That is perfectly fine. I do want to create the image from Docker Hub. So I just uploaded my image onto Docker Hub. So I'm going to go ahead and load it onto here. Okay, so I'm specifying the name of my Docker image, which is actually right here. Okay, V1. So that is the name of my Docker image. I do want a Linux container. It doesn't really matter. We'll just pick whatever the hardware profile is. We're going to give it a DNS name in this case. So we don't actually have to access it via IP anymore. We can actually access it via DNS. So this is kind of like a PaaS. Okay, so we give it a PaaS name, and it's actually going to be available in this URL, Jakarta Cafe Reza eastus.azurecontainer.io. Right, and we'll see that in a moment. Now, as we know, Payara runs on port 8080, so I'm going to have to open up port 8080 explicitly here. Okay, so I specified port 8080. It's still TCP. No tags necessary. Let's review and create, and hit create here. And again, this is going to take a little bit of time to deploy. Hopefully, not too much time. Hopefully, we can deploy this right in the middle of our session here. So I have 3 more minutes. Let's see if it happens in 3 minutes. If not, we'll let it go. So yeah, so there you have it all. Hopefully, you take a look at this and try this out. And if you run into any issues, and if you have questions or concerns, you can reach out to me. It's relatively easily available. You can find me on Twitter. I also have a website with some contact information if you need to access me. And also wanted to mention I have another session. My last session for the conference today is at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard, and I'll be talking about how to use Cosmos DB. That's yet another NoSQL service on Azure, and we're going to use that from a Jakarta application using the new Jakarta NoSQL standard. I hope you guys have already had that talk with Octavio, and he's explained to you what the Jakarta NoSQL standard is. So our deployment is done. So let's copy this over.
Reza, other question, Reza.
Yeah.
Yeah. For IaaS, how do you choose the right type for VM for your platform?
I just picked whatever is the most popular, frankly speaking. So Red Hat Linux is by far the most popular Linux distribution that is deployed onto Azure usually. But it's not necessarily just about that. You can deploy Ubuntu, SUSE, whatever flavor of Linux that you want. In fact, you can also install Oracle Linux if you're wanting to use that. So it really just depends on what the upper level stack software that you're using. For example, if you're using WebLogic, then it's probably recommended that you use Oracle Linux. If you're using JBoss API, they likely will want you to use Red Hat Linux in order to run JBoss API. So it just depends on what your favorite operating system is and why you would like to use it. So the application is up and running now. I'm going to just access it real quick. And there's the application running on Azure Container Instances. So that is all the time that I have. Really appreciate it. Let me know if you guys have any questions. You can contact me out of band, of course, for this.
Thank you, Reza.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Okay. See you guys in a little bit.
Okay. No other questions. Chicos, gracias por la participación de Reza, y como ya saben, pueden seguirle en las cuentas de Twitter de Reza y también en su blog. Y no olviden que los videos de esa sesión van a estar subidos en la plataforma del Perú Yuc y además en el Facebook de Yo Veréis. Muchísimas gracias y nos vemos en la siguiente sesión.